Scarlett Monroe had a billionaire husband, a stunning mansion, and a baby on the way. She stood at the top of her grand staircase, ready to share the joyous news. But in one brutal moment, her world shattered. A hand on her back, a violent shove, and a sickening fall. As paramedics fought to save her, she saw her husband's mistress watching from the shadows, a silent witness to a crime no one else would believe happened. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now let's dive in. The scent of money and old-world roses clung to the air in their Atherton, California mansion. It was a scent Scarlett had once found intoxicating, the perfume of a life she'd only read about in novels. Now it mostly smelled of Dominic. Everything in the house did. The sprawling estate, with its pristine gardens and panoramic views of the Santa Cruz Mountains, was less a home and more a monument to her husband, Dominic Steele. His taste, his ambition, his success was etched into every polished surface and hand-carved molding. Scarlett traced the rim of a porcelain teacup, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the breakfast nook. Outside, a team of gardeners moved with silent, practiced efficiency, manicuring the already flawless landscape. They were part of the scenery, just like the expensive art on the walls and the staff who materialized only when needed. Scarlett often felt like part of the scenery herself, Dominic's most prized acquisition. They had met 7 years ago. She was a fledgling art curator, full of passion for Renaissance portraiture, working at a small but respected gallery in San Francisco. He was the charismatic tech mogul, the visionary behind a revolutionary data mining company that had made him a billionaire before 30. He'd walked into her gallery to purchase a piece for his office lobby, and had, in his own words, decided he needed the curator as well. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of extravagant dates, private jets to Paris for dinner, and declarations of love that felt as grand and dizzying as the lifestyle he offered. He'd admired her intelligence, her quiet grace, and what he called her untouched quality. He made her feel seen in a way no one ever had. She, in turn, was captivated by his drive, his sharp intellect, and the vulnerability he showed her in rare, quiet moments. She fell in love not with the billionaire, but with the man who claimed he'd been waiting his whole life for someone who didn't care about his money. It was a beautiful, seductive lie they both chose to believe. The wedding was an event the society pages talked about for months. Scarlett, in a custom Vera Wang gown, had felt like she was stepping into a fairy tale. But castles, she soon learned, could be beautiful prisons. Dominic's love was possessive, his admiration conditional. He loved her as his wife, the elegant, poised woman who charmed his business partners and ran his philanthropic foundation with effortless grace. He encouraged her to quit her job at the gallery, framing it as a chance for her to focus on more important things, on them. Slowly, methodically, he had isolated her, severing her ties to her old life until her world revolved entirely around him. Her friends, with their 9-to-5 jobs and ordinary problems, drifted away, intimidated by the sheer scale of her new reality. "You're a steal now, darling," he'd say, his hand possessively on her waist at yet another gala. "You represent me," and she did. She played the part perfectly. But in the quiet hours of the night, when Dominic was asleep beside her, a profound loneliness would wash over her. She missed the smell of turpentine and old canvas in her small studio apartment. She missed the easy camaraderie with her colleagues, the thrill of discovering a new artist. She missed the woman she had been, the one who had opinions that weren't simply echoes of Dominic's. Now at 29, she was pregnant. The 2 blue lines on the test stick a week ago had sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated joy through her, followed swiftly by a wave of terror. A baby. Their baby. This would be the one thing that was truly hers, a part of her soul taking root in this gilded cage. It would also be the final, unbreakable link to Dominic. The thought was both a comfort and a curse. She hadn't told him yet. She wanted to wait for the perfect moment, to craft a memory as flawless as the life they presented to the world. She'd planned a special dinner for tonight, just the two of them. She'd wear the blue dress he loved, the one that matched her eyes, and after their favorite meal, she would give him a small, elegantly wrapped box. Inside would be a tiny pair of silver baby shoes. A shadow fell over her. Dominic stood in the doorway, already dressed in a tailored Tom Ford suit, his phone pressed to his ear. He was always on the phone. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his jaw was set with the focused intensity that had built his empire. He ended his call with a clipped, "Handle it," and turned his attention to her. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning, darling," he said, striding over to kiss her forehead. It was a gesture that felt more like a branding than an act of affection. "Big day. We're closing the merger with Omnicorp. That's wonderful, Dominic." She tried to infuse her voice with the appropriate level of enthusiasm. His work was everything. His moods, their schedule, their entire existence was dictated by the rise and fall of the stock market and the relentless pursuit of his next acquisition. He barely registered her response, already pouring himself a coffee, his gaze fixed on the tablet displaying market data. "It's going to be a bloodbath for them, but a huge win for us. We'll be the largest data analytics firm on the planet." He took a sip of coffee, his eyes scanning the screen. "Don't forget, we have the Hamiltons' charity dinner tonight." Scarlett's heart sank. "Tonight? But I thought... I was hoping we could have a quiet evening at home. I was going to cook." He finally looked at her, a flicker of annoyance in his steel-grey eyes. "Scarlett, we've had this on the calendar for months. Bill Hamilton is a key board member at Omnicorp. My presence tonight is non-negotiable. It's a victory lap." He softened his tone, reaching out to stroke her cheek. "We'll have a quiet night tomorrow, I promise." She nodded, the unspoken message clear. His plans were the only ones that mattered. Her little dinner, her carefully planned announcement, would have to wait. It always had to wait. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll make sure my dress is ready." "That's my girl," he said, his attention already back on his tablet. "Oh, and Renee will be stopping by this afternoon to go over the guest list and seating chart for the Foundation's gala next month. Try to be efficient. I need her back at the office by 3, Renee." The name landed like a stone in Scarlett's stomach. Renee Ashford was Dominic's chief of staff, a woman who was as ambitious and polished as he was. She was sharp, beautiful, and utterly devoted to Dominic. Scarlett had always felt a prickle of unease around her. It was in the way Renee looked at Dominic, a proprietary gleam in her eyes that went beyond professional admiration. It was in the way Dominic spoke of her, with a respect and reliance that felt different from how he spoke of anyone else. Scarlett had once tried to voice her discomfort, but Dominic had dismissed it as petty jealousy. "You're being insecure, Scarlett. Renee is indispensable. Don't create drama where there is none." So she had buried her suspicions, telling herself she was being paranoid. Dominic was a powerful, attractive man. Of course women would admire him. But the feeling lingered, a cold knot of dread she couldn't unravel. As Dominic left the room, his voice already booming into his phone on another call, Scarlett looked out at the perfect garden again. The roses, in their vibrant, flawless bloom, suddenly seemed suffocating. They were beautiful, yes, but they were cultivated, controlled. their wildness tamed to fit a rich man's vision of perfection. Just like her, she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. A secret, a hope, a life that was hers alone. Tonight, she thought with a surge of defiance. I'll tell him tonight, after the charity dinner. I won't let him push it aside again. She would reclaim this moment, this joy. It was a small rebellion, but it was a start. In this house of glass and secrets, it was the only thing she could hold on to. The day unfolded in a blur of obligations. There was the call with the caterer for the foundation gala, the fitting for the Hamiltons' dinner, and the hollow, performative chat with Renee. Dominic's chief of staff arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, her presence filling the cavernous living room with an energy that was both electric and unnerving. Dressed in a sleek, form-fitting sheath dress, Renee was the epitome of corporate chic. She was a woman who knew what she wanted, and Scarlett suspected, knew exactly how to get it. "Scarlett," Renee greeted her, her smile bright but her eyes coolly analytical. "Dominic said you'd be ready for me." "Yes, come in, Renee." Scarlett led her to the large oak table in the library, the seating chart for the gala already spread out. For an hour, they spoke of table arrangements, donor sensitivities, and floral centerpieces. Renee was ruthlessly efficient, her comments sharp and insightful. She knew every major player, their allegiances, and their rivalries. She knew Dominic's world inside and out. Throughout their meeting, Scarlett felt like an outsider in her own home, a student being quizzed by the real master of the house. Renee's phone buzzed incessantly with messages that were clearly from Dominic. Her replies were swift, her thumbs flying across the screen with an intimacy that felt far too familiar. At one point, she laughed softly at a message, a private, knowing smile on her face. "Something funny?" Scarlett asked, her voice tighter than she intended. Renee looked up, her expression momentarily unguarded. "Oh, just Dominic. He's in a mood. The Omnicorp deal is making him playful." She quickly schooled her features back into a professional mask. "Right, so we'll place the mayor at table 3, away from the tech investors." "Good." The word playful echoed in Scarlett's mind. It wasn't a word she would use to describe her husband's business dealings. It suggested a level of familiarity, a shared secret language that excluded her completely. The cold knot of dread in her stomach tightened. By the time Renee left, Scarlett felt drained and agitated. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floors, and the house felt unnervingly silent. She walked upstairs to their master suite, the silver baby shoes still in their gift-wrapped box on her vanity. Her reflection in the mirror seemed pale and uncertain. She put on the sapphire blue dress, a column of silk that Dominic had bought for her in Milan. It was beautiful, but it felt like a costume. Dominic came home just as the sun was setting, his face flushed with triumph. "We did it," he announced, shrugging off his jacket and loosening his tie. "We absolutely crushed them. The board folded on every one of our terms." He strode over to her, pulling her into a rough embrace. He smelled of expensive cologne and victory. "You look stunning, Scarlett. Absolutely perfect." He kissed her, but his mind was clearly elsewhere, still replaying the triumphs of his day. The charity dinner was a glittering affair held at a historic hotel in San Francisco. Scarlett was on autopilot, smiling, nodding, and making polite conversation with people whose names she barely remembered. She felt Dominic's hand on the small of her back all night, a constant, proprietary pressure. He was showing her off, his beautiful, elegant wife, the perfect accessory to his latest conquest. She watched him across the ballroom, holding court, his laughter booming, his charisma drawing people into his orbit like moths to a flame. And she saw it. The lie she had been telling herself for years finally crumbled. He wasn't the man who loved her for her quiet grace. He was a man who loved power, and she was simply another one of his assets, a symbol of his status. The realization didn't come with a crash, but with a slow, sickening certainty that settled deep in her bones. They arrived home just after midnight. The house was dark and silent, the staff having long since retired. Dominic was still riding the high of his victory, pouring them both a glass of scotch at the bar in their living room. "To the new empire," he said, raising his glass. Scarlett didn't take the one he offered her. "I can't," she said softly. He frowned. "Don't be a bore, Scarlett. It's a celebration." "I can't, Dominic. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, fragile and momentous. She watched his face, searching for the flicker of joy, the surprise, the love she had so desperately hoped to see. Instead, his expression went blank. The triumphant glow vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. "Pregnant?" he repeated, the word flat, devoid of emotion. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She forced a smile, trying to recapture the magic of the moment she had planned. "I was going to tell you tonight, properly. I bought you something." He didn't ask what it was. He just stared at her, his grey eyes turning to chips of ice. "How?" The question was so cold, so clinical, it felt like a slap. "What do you mean, how? We're married, Dominic." "We were careful," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I was careful. Sometimes things just happen," she whispered, the joy she'd been clinging to now curdling into fear. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He set his glass down with a sharp click. "No, not now. This is not happening now." He began to pace, his movements agitated, predatory. "A baby. My God, Scarlett. Do you have any idea what this means? The timing is catastrophic. We just closed the biggest deal of my life. I need to be focused. I can't be distracted by this." "A distraction?" Her voice cracked. "Dominic, this is our child." "It's a complication," he roared, his control finally snapping. "It's a complication I don't need." The cruelty of his words stole her breath. All the years of buried doubts, of feeling like a possession, coalesced into a single, horrifying truth. He didn't love her. He had never loved her. He had only loved the idea of her, the perfect wife who fit so seamlessly into his perfect life. A baby, a messy, demanding, unpredictable baby, didn't fit. Tears streamed down her face. "How can you say that?" "Because it's the truth," he shot back. "Your timing, as always, is impeccable." The sneer in his voice broke something inside her. The fear gave way to a surge of white-hot anger. "My timing? This is my life, Dominic. It's not just some entry on your corporate calendar." She turned and fled, not knowing where she was going, just needing to get away from him, from the cold, monstrous stranger he had become. She ran towards the grand, sweeping staircase, her hand clutching the smooth, polished wood of the banister. She had to get to her room, lock the door, protect the tiny life inside her. She was halfway up when she heard his footsteps behind her, fast and heavy. "Scarlett, don't you walk away from me," he yelled. She glanced back, her heart pounding in her chest. The look on his face was one of pure, unrestrained fury. It was a look she had never seen before, and it terrified her. She took another step up, and then it happened. A hard, brutal shove in the center of her back. The world tilted. The air was ripped from her lungs. For a split second, she was suspended in disbelief, her mind refusing to process the betrayal. Then, gravity took over. She tumbled forward, her body weightless and clumsy. Her head hit the edge of a step with a sickening crack. The world exploded into a kaleidoscope of sharp, blinding pain and spiraling darkness. Her hands flew instinctively to her stomach, a desperate, futile gesture to protect her child. The last thing she saw before her consciousness faded was a figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, silhouetted in the dim light from the living room. It wasn't Dominic. It was a woman, her form frozen in the shadows. It was Renee. Renee Ashford's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. One moment, she was standing in the shadows of the grand foyer, her purpose a venomous cocktail of jealousy and desperation. The next, she was a spectator to a horror show. She had seen Scarlett run, heard Dominic's enraged roar, and watched as he lunged up the stairs after his wife. And then, the shove. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, violent act. She saw Scarlett's body pitch forward, a graceful arc of blue silk turned into a broken, tumbling mess. The sound was something Renee would never forget, a series of dull, wet thuds, punctuated by a sharp crack as Scarlett's head connected with the marble. The final sound was a soft, heavy slump as she came to rest at the bottom of the stairs, a crumpled heap of discarded beauty. For a long, silent moment, no one moved. Renee was frozen, her mind struggling to reconcile the Dominic she knew, the powerful, controlled, seductive man, with the monster who had just pushed his pregnant wife down the stairs. Dominic stood on the landing, his chest heaving, his face a mask of shock, as if his own actions had surprised him. Then, the shock on his face morphed. It was a terrifyingly swift transformation. The raw fury drained away, replaced by a cold, sharp-eyed calculation. He looked down at Scarlett's still form, then his eyes darted around the cavernous hall and landed directly on Renee. He saw her, their eyes locked. In that single, shared glance, an entire unspoken conversation took place. Renee saw his panic, his guilt, and a chilling, desperate plea. He wasn't just looking at his mistress, he was looking at his only alibi, his only potential savior. And Renee, in that same instant, understood the power she now held. She had come here tonight to end things. Not with Dominic, but with his wife. She'd parked her car down the street and slipped in through the service entrance, a key Dominic had given her months ago resting heavy in her pocket. She had been waiting for the right moment to confront Scarlett, to lay her claim, to tell her that she was the one Dominic truly loved, the one he truly needed. She had imagined tears, maybe a shouting match, but ultimately Scarlett's graceful, defeated exit. She had not imagined this. Dominic was the first to move. He scrambled down the stairs, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Scarlett!" he cried out, his voice a theatrical performance of anguish. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering over her body, afraid to touch. "Oh my God, Scarlett, baby. What happened?" He looked up at Renee again, his eyes boring into hers, silently coaching her, pleading with her. Play along, Renee's mind raced. Call the police? Scream? Run? If she told the truth, Dominic's life would be over. And hers? She was his accomplice in adultery, now a witness to attempted murder. They would drag her through the mud. Her career would be destroyed, and the future she had so carefully constructed around him would be annihilated. But if she lied, if she helped him, he was her everything. For 2 years, she had dedicated her life to him. She'd been his strategist, his confidant, his secret lover. She had sacrificed her own ambitions to fuel his, believing that when he finally reached the pinnacle of his power, he would pull her up to stand beside him. He had promised her. "Just be patient, Renee," he'd murmur in the dead of night, in hotel rooms and in the back of his car. Scarlett is a complication. But you are the future, now looking at the complication bleeding on the marble floor. Renee made her choice. It was a decision born not of love, but of a desperate, selfish need for survival. She had invested too much to walk away with nothing. She stepped out of the shadows, her face a carefully constructed mask of shock and concern. "Dominic, what happened? I heard a scream." He looked up, relief washing over his features. "I don't know. We were talking. She was upset. She must have tripped." He was already building the narrative, the foundation of the lie they would have to live. "Is she breathing?" Renee asked, her voice commendably steady. Dominic finally touched Scarlett, his fingers going to her neck. "Yes, there's a pulse. It's faint. We have to call 911. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, but his voice, when he spoke to the dispatcher, was a masterpiece of panicked control. "My wife. She's fallen down the stairs. She's pregnant. Please, you have to hurry." While he was on the phone, Renee knelt, her gaze sweeping over the scene. The blue silk of Scarlett's dress was rucked up around her thighs. A dark, ugly bruise was already forming on her temple, but the most horrifying sight was the dark stain spreading on the back of the dress near the floor. Blood. The wail of sirens grew closer, a sound that signaled both rescue and judgment. Dominic ended the call and looked at Renee, his eyes wild. "You were just arriving," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "You were dropping off some papers I forgot. You heard her scream as you came in. You saw her fall. You saw her trip." "Dominic, say it, Renee," he hissed, his grip tightening on her arm. "You saw her trip. Her heel caught on the runner." Renee looked at the top of the stairs. The runner was perfectly smooth. But it was his word, their word, against a woman who couldn't speak. "Her heel caught," Renee repeated, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "She tripped." The paramedics burst in, a whirlwind of focused, life-saving energy. They swarmed around Scarlett, their voices a calm, professional litany of medical terms. Unresponsive female, late 20s, visible head trauma, possible spinal injury. Dominic hovered over them, playing the part of the distraught husband perfectly. He answered their questions, his voice choked with emotion. "She's 16 weeks pregnant. Is the baby okay? Please, you have to save the baby." Renee watched from the sidelines as they carefully loaded Scarlett onto a backboard, a neck brace secured around her throat. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind, tired eyes, glanced at Renee. "Did you see what happened?" Renee's heart seized. This was it. The moment to tell the truth or seal the lie. She looked from the paramedic to Dominic, whose desperate gaze was fixed on her. "She was coming down the stairs," Renee said, her voice a near whisper. "She seemed to catch her heel. It was so fast. She just tumbled." The paramedic nodded, accepting the story without question, her attention already back on her patient. 2 police officers arrived next, their presence shifting the atmosphere from medical emergency to potential crime scene. They separated Dominic and Renee, their questions more pointed. Renee repeated her story to a stern-faced officer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking. She focused on the details Dominic had given her, embellishing them, making them sound real. The treacherous heel, the awkward stumble, the tragic accident. With every word, the lie grew stronger, more solid, encasing the truth like concrete. She watched as the other officer spoke with Dominic. He was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face. It was a breathtaking performance. He was the picture of a devastated husband, his world crumbling around him. Renee felt a strange mix of admiration and revulsion. He was a monster, but he was a brilliant one. As the ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing silently in the night, a profound and chilling quiet descended on the house. It was just Renee and Dominic, standing in the grand foyer, a few feet from the dark stain on the marble floor. Dominic finally looked at her, his mask of grief falling away to reveal a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Renee didn't answer. She just stared at the spot where Scarlett had lain. She had come here for a confrontation, to claim her prize. Instead, she had become a conspirator. She was bound to him now, not by love or loyalty, but by a terrible, shared secret. The power she thought she held was an illusion. In reality, she was just as trapped as the woman in the ambulance. The gilded cage had just expanded, and now it had 2 prisoners. Pain was the first thing to pierce the thick, suffocating fog. It was a dull, throbbing ache in her head, a chorus of sharp, protesting cries from every muscle in her body. Scarlett drifted in and out of consciousness, suspended in a disorienting limbo of beeping machines and hushed voices. Fragments of memory flickered at the edges of her mind like faulty projections. The scratchy feel of the stair runner, the scent of Dominic's cologne, the terrifying look in his eyes, the brutal impact. And then, a woman's silhouette in the darkness. When she finally opened her eyes, the world was a blurry wash of white. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the cloying scent of roses she was used to. A tube was taped to her hand, snaking up to a clear bag of fluid hanging from a metal pole. She was in a hospital. A wave of panic washed over her. The baby. She tried to sit up, a strangled cry escaping her lips as a searing pain shot through her back and head. A nurse rushed to her side, a kind-faced woman with warm hands. "Easy now, Mrs. Steele. You're safe. You had a bad fall." "My baby," Scarlett rasped, her throat raw. "Is my baby okay?" The nurse's kind expression faltered, replaced by a deep, professional sympathy. She squeezed Scarlett's hand gently. "The doctor will be in to speak with you shortly. Just try to rest." But Scarlett knew. She knew from the pity in the nurse's eyes, from the gentle way she avoided the question. A sob tore through her, a raw animal sound of pure agony. The physical pain was nothing compared to the vast, hollow emptiness that opened up inside her. The tiny, secret hope she had nurtured, the one pure thing in her life, was gone. Extinguished before it ever had a chance to burn bright. Dominic wasn't there. In the hours that followed, as doctors came and went, speaking in low, somber tones about concussions, severe bruising, and hairline fractures, her husband was conspicuously absent. They told her he had been there earlier, frantic with worry, but had been sent home to rest. The story sounded plausible, but Scarlett knew him. Dominic didn't rest, especially not when there was a crisis to manage. He would be at the center of it, controlling the narrative, ensuring his image remained untarnished. The lie was already in motion. She could feel it. They all spoke of the accident, a tragic, unfortunate slip. Her mind, however, kept replaying the moment on the stairs, the pressure on her back. It wasn't a slip. It was a push. Later that afternoon, a man in a rumpled suit appeared at her door. He wasn't a doctor. He had the weary, observant eyes of someone who had seen the worst of human nature. "Mrs. Steele, I'm Detective Grant Lawson, San Mateo County Sheriff's Office." He flashed a badge, his voice calm and steady. "I know this is a terrible time, but I need to ask you a few questions about your fall, just for the official report." Scarlett stared at him, her mind still hazy from the pain and medication. "Report? Standard procedure for a domestic accident of this severity," he explained, pulling up a chair. He didn't take out a notepad, which she found strange. He just watched her, his gaze patient and unnervingly perceptive. "Your husband and his chief of staff, Miss Ashford, already gave us their statements. They said you seemed to catch your heel on the stair runner and lost your balance. There it was. The official story. Neat, tidy, and utterly false. Renee was there. The silhouette in the darkness. She hadn't been a figment of her imagination. She had been a witness, and she had lied for him. The betrayal was a fresh stab of pain, sharp and deep. They both said it was a terrible accident, Detective Lawson continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Is that how you remember it, Mrs. Steele? Scarlett looked down at her hands, lying limp on the starchy white blanket. A war raged within her. If she told the truth, what would happen? Who would believe her? Dominic Steele was a pillar of the community, a charismatic billionaire, beloved by the press and politicians alike. She was his fragile, emotional wife. It would be her word against his and Renee's. He would paint her as unstable, hysterical, vindictive. He would destroy her, but the image of his face, twisted in fury, was burned into her memory. The feeling of his hand on her back was a phantom sensation she could still feel, and the empty, aching void where her baby had been, that demanded the truth. No, she whispered, the word barely audible. Detective Lawson leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. No, it wasn't an accident. The words grew stronger as she spoke them, fueled by a nascent, trembling rage. He pushed me. The detective's expression didn't change, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Confirmation, perhaps. He had suspected it. Your husband pushed you? He asked, his tone even. We were arguing, she said, tears welling in her eyes again. I told him I was pregnant. He wasn't happy. He called the baby a complication. I ran from him. He followed me up the stairs. He yelled at me, and then he pushed me. She recounted the entire horrifying sequence, her voice breaking with sobs. She told him about Renee, standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching. When she finished, she was exhausted, her body trembling. Detective Lawson remained silent for a long moment, letting her compose herself. He finally reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, official-looking notepad and a pen. Mrs. Steele, he said, his voice gentle but firm. What you're alleging is a very serious crime. Attempted murder and feticide. Your husband's story, corroborated by an eyewitness, is that you tripped. It will be their word against yours. But it's the truth, she insisted, her voice pleading. I believe you, he said simply. The words were a lifeline. In a world that had been turned upside down, where truth and lies were twisted and manipulated, this stranger, this rumpled detective, believed her. It was the first glimmer of hope she'd had. But believing you and proving it are two different things, he continued, his expression grim. Dominic Steele is a powerful man. He'll have the best lawyers money can buy. They will try to discredit you in every way imaginable. Are you prepared for that? Was she? A week ago, she was a pampered wife, living in a gilded cage, her biggest worry what to wear to a charity dinner. Now, she was facing a battle against a ruthless, powerful man who had tried to kill her and her child. She was broken, grieving, and utterly alone. She looked down at her stomach, placing a hand over the emptiness. The fight wasn't just for her anymore. It was for the child she had lost. It was for the justice the tiny, stolen life deserved. She met the detective's gaze, her own eyes hardening with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. I'm prepared. The detective gave her a small, encouraging nod. Good, he said. Then let's get to work. He clicked his pen, ready to write. Tell me everything, Mrs. Steele, from the very beginning. And for the first time since she woke up in this sterile, white room, Scarlett felt like she wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor, and her story was finally being heard. Detective Grant Lawson drove away from the hospital with a familiar, bitter taste in his mouth. It was the taste of a case that was both righteous and nearly impossible. He'd been a cop for 20 years, and he'd developed a finely tuned instinct for lies. Dominic Steele's story, with its smooth, polished edges and the convenient corroboration from his chief of staff, had felt all wrong. It was too perfect, too clean for a moment of sudden, chaotic tragedy. Scarlett Steele, on the other hand, was a mess of raw, unfiltered grief and trauma. Her story was fragmented, emotional, and utterly believable. The problem, as he'd told her, was proof. In a court of law, a compelling narrative from a grieving victim often wasn't enough to overcome a powerful man's plausible deniability. Lawson started where he always did, with the details. He went back to the Steele mansion the next day. The official police tape was gone, but the house still felt like a crime scene. A cleaning crew had been through. The dark stain on the marble was gone, scrubbed clean. An attempt to erase the evidence, Lawson thought grimly. He walked the path Scarlett had taken, from the living room to the grand staircase. He stood on the step where she'd fallen, looking up at the spot where Dominic would have been. He noted the lack of any scuff marks, any sign of a struggle. Steele was smart. Or lucky. His first formal interview was with Dominic. They met in the library of the mansion, the same room where Renee and Scarlett had discussed gala seating charts just days before. Dominic was dressed in somber grey, his face etched with lines of concern. He'd hired a lawyer, of course, a high-powered, pinstriped shark named Marcus Thorne, who sat in on the interview, his presence a silent warning. "Detective, I've already told the officers everything," Dominic began, his voice heavy with sorrow. "It was a tragic, horrific accident. My wife, she's not herself right now. The trauma, the loss of our child, it's unimaginable." "She's alleging something very different, Mr. Steele," Lawson said, keeping his tone neutral. "She's alleging that you pushed her." Dominic looked genuinely shocked. He glanced at his lawyer, then back at Lawson, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Pushed her? My God, why would I do that? I loved her. I loved our baby." It was a masterful performance. "She said you were arguing," Lawson pressed. "That you weren't happy about the pregnancy. That's absurd," Dominic scoffed, shaking his head. "We were thrilled. A bit surprised, yes, but thrilled. Any argument we had was just normal married couple stuff. Stress from work, nothing more." "She mentioned your merger with Omnicorp," Lawson said, watching Dominic's face for any reaction. "She said you called the baby a complication." For the first time, a flicker of something, annoyance, anger, crossed Dominic's face before being quickly suppressed. "She must have misunderstood. I was talking about the merger, the complications involved in the final stages. My wife is sensitive. She sometimes misinterprets things, especially when she's emotional." The narrative was clear. Scarlett was unstable, emotional, unreliable. It was a classic, textbook defense. Lawson knew he wouldn't get anything more from Dominic today. His next target was Renee Ashford. He interviewed her at the sheriff's department, away from Dominic's influence. She arrived looking poised and professional, but Lawson could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands as she clasped them on the table. She repeated her story, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "I was dropping off some documents. I heard a scream. I saw Scarlett at the top of the stairs, and then she just fell. It looked like her heel twisted." "You're sure that's what you saw?" Lawson asked, leaning forward. "You're sure you didn't see Mr. Steele on the stairs with her?" "No," she said, her voice firm. Dominic was downstairs. He cried out her name and ran to her after she fell. It was a small but significant deviation from Dominic's own story. Dominic had claimed to be on the stairs behind Scarlett. Renee was placing him downstairs. It was a tiny crack in the foundation of their lie. But it was a crack nonetheless. "You have a close relationship with Mr. Steele," Lawson stated, not as a question. "He's my boss," she replied coolly. "That's all?" Renee's eyes flashed. "I'm his chief of staff. I've worked for him for 5 years. I'm loyal to him and to the company." "That's all." Lawson let the silence hang in the air. He knew she was lying. He didn't have proof of the affair, but he could feel it. It was the missing piece, the motive for her loyalty. He decided to change tactics. He started digging into Dominic Steele's life, not as a husband, but as a businessman. He pulled financial records, shareholder reports, and press clippings. The Omnicorp merger was, as Dominic had claimed, the biggest deal of his career. It was set to make him one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. But Lawson also found something else, buried in the fine print of the deal's preliminary filings, a morality clause. It was a standard feature in many high-level corporate agreements, designed to protect the new entity from any scandal involving its key executives. A messy, public divorce, an accusation of domestic violence, any of it could jeopardize the merger, potentially costing Dominic billions. And then he found the prenup. Scarlett had mentioned it, and her lawyer, a young but sharp woman named Olivia, had provided a copy. In the event of a divorce initiated by Scarlett, she would receive a respectable but, for a billionaire's wife, relatively modest settlement of $10 million. However, in the event of Dominic's death, she stood to inherit half of his estate. But there was a crucial clause. If the divorce was due to Dominic's infidelity, the prenup was void, and Scarlett would be entitled to a full half of their community property, a sum that would be counted in the billions. Suddenly, the motive wasn't just about avoiding a complication. If Scarlett had discovered his affair with Renee, and her unease around Renee suggested she was close, and filed for divorce, the resulting scandal and financial fallout would be catastrophic. It would destroy the Omnicorp deal and cost him a fortune. But with Scarlett dead, he would be the grieving widower, his reputation intact, the merger secure, and his fortune safe. He hadn't succeeded in killing her, but he had eliminated the other problem: the baby. Without a child, a divorce would be simpler, cleaner. He had tried to solve all his problems with one violent, brutal push. Lawson felt a cold certainty settle over him. He had the motive. He had the victim's testimony. All he needed was to break the alibi. All he needed was to break Renee Ashford. He decided to pay her an unscheduled visit at her upscale apartment in Palo Alto. He found her just as she was getting home from work, looking exhausted and frayed. "Ms. Ashford, we need to talk," he said, holding up his badge. "I've already given my statement," she said, her voice weary. "Statements can be amended," he said, his gaze intense. "I know you're lying, Renee. I know you and Dominic are having an affair. And I know that what happened on those stairs was not an accident." He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. "That's ridiculous. Is it? Or is it ridiculous that you're willing to throw your life away to protect a man who tried to murder his wife in front of you?" "We're pulling phone records, Renee. Text messages, call logs, hotel receipts. It's only a matter of time before we prove the affair. And when we do, your testimony as a loyal employee falls apart. You become an accomplice, an accessory after the fact to attempted murder." He let the words sink in, watching her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. "He's using you, Renee. He needed a witness to back up his story, and you were there. Do you really think he's going to stand by you when this all comes crashing down? He'll sacrifice you to save himself. Men like Dominic Steele always do. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked away, her jaw trembling. She was trapped, and she knew it. "Think about it," Lawson said, his voice softening slightly. "Think about what you saw. Think about what's right. Scarlett Steele is lying in a hospital bed, having lost her child, while the man who did it is preparing to celebrate the biggest deal of his life. Is that the side you want to be on?" He handed her his card. "When you're ready to tell the truth, you call me. But don't wait too long. My offer to see you as a witness, and not a defendant, has an expiration date." He left her there, standing in the doorway of her lonely, expensive apartment, the foundations of her carefully built world cracking beneath her feet. He didn't know if she would call, but he had planted the seed of doubt, the poison of self-preservation. And in a world built on lies, sometimes that was all it took to bring the whole rotten structure tumbling down. The days in the hospital bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of pain, grief, and physical therapy. Scarlett's body was slowly healing. The bruises faded from angry purple to a sickly yellow-green, and she could now walk the length of the hospital corridor with the aid of a walker, each step a testament to her quiet, stubborn will. But her spirit remained a shattered landscape. The emptiness within her was a constant, physical ache, a phantom limb where her hopes for a child had been. Dominic had visited once, accompanied by his lawyer. He had stood at the foot of her bed, his face a mask of practiced sorrow, and spoke of his undying love and his devastation over their tragic loss. He never once met her eyes. Scarlett had stared at him, her heart a cold, dead weight in her chest, and said nothing. Her silence was her only weapon, and it seemed to unnerve him more than any accusation could. After 5 excruciating minutes, he and his lawyer had left. He had not been back since. Her only regular visitor was Detective Lawson, who would stop by every few days with quiet updates and a container of surprisingly good coffee from a deli near the station. He never pushed her, never pressed for details she wasn't ready to give. He just sat with her, his presence a steady, reassuring anchor in the storm of her grief. He told her about the morality clause, the prenup, the motive. He told her he was building a case. It was a slow, painstaking process, but he was not giving up. Her lawyer, Olivia Mercer, was another source of strength. A sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 30s, Olivia was a fierce advocate. She handled the barrage of legal notices from Dominic's team, shielding Scarlett from the worst of it. She was preparing for the divorce, but also for the criminal case she hoped would follow. "He's trying to paint you as mentally unstable," Olivia explained during one visit, her eyes flashing with anger as she reviewed a document from Dominic's lawyer. "He's filed a motion to have you psychologically evaluated, claiming your allegations are a product of grief-induced delusion." "He's trying to have me declared crazy," Scarlett said, the words flat and emotionless. It was exactly what she had expected. "We'll fight it," Olivia said, her voice fierce. "And we'll win. You are the most sane person in this situation, Scarlett. You're a survivor." The word survivor felt wrong. She felt like a ghost, haunting the ruins of her own life. She had lost everything, her baby, her husband, her home, her identity. Who was Scarlett Steele without Dominic? For 7 years, her life had been defined by him. Now, adrift, she felt terrifyingly anonymous. The turning point came on a grey, drizzly afternoon, 2 weeks after the fall. An older woman with kind, gentle eyes and silver hair tied in a loose bun appeared at her door. She introduced herself as Teresa Langford, a volunteer grief counselor with the hospital. "I was so sorry to hear about your loss," Teresa said, her voice soft and soothing. Scarlett braced herself for the usual platitudes, the well-meaning but empty phrases about time healing all wounds. But Teresa just sat with her in silence for a few minutes, her presence calm and accepting. "It's all right to be angry," Teresa said finally, her gaze deeply compassionate. "You have every right to be." And with that simple validation, the dam inside Scarlett broke. The grief she had held so tightly, the rage she had suppressed, came pouring out in a torrent of ragged, gut-wrenching sobs. She wept for her lost child, for the years she had wasted, for the woman she had allowed herself to become. She wept until she was empty, exhausted, and utterly spent. Teresa just sat there, holding her hand, a silent, steady presence, until the storm passed. "He took everything from me," Scarlett whispered, her voice hoarse. "No, my dear," Teresa said gently. "He took a great deal, but he did not take everything. He did not take your strength. You just haven't realized how much of it you have yet." Over the next few weeks, Scarlett met with Teresa every day. They talked for hours. Scarlett spoke of her dreams of being a curator, the passion for art she had buried under layers of social obligations and wifely duties. She spoke of the loneliness of her gilded cage, the slow, insidious erosion of her sense of self. Teresa listened, not as a therapist analyzing a patient, but as a wise woman guiding a younger one back to herself. It was Teresa who suggested she start drawing again. At first, Scarlett resisted. Her hands felt clumsy, her mind blank. But she picked up the charcoal pencil and sketchbook Teresa brought her, and she began to draw. She didn't draw the pretty flowers in the vase by her bed or the view from her window. She drew the fall. She drew the jagged, spiraling darkness, the splintering of light. She drew the terror on her own face, the cold fury on Dominic's. Her drawings were raw, chaotic, and visceral. They were the visual language of her trauma, and with each stroke of charcoal, she felt a small piece of her power returning. She was no longer just the victim of the story. She was its narrator. The day she was discharged from the hospital, she didn't go back to the Atherton mansion. Olivia had arranged for her to stay in a quiet, discreet serviced apartment in the city, funded by a trust her parents had left her. Walking into the small, anonymous space felt like taking her first breath of clean air after years of breathing something toxic. It was sparse, impersonal, but it was hers. That evening, Detective Lawson called. "I have something, Scarlett," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "Renee Ashford. She's agreed to talk." A jolt went through her. Renee, the watcher in the shadows, the woman who held the key to her husband's guilt. "She's not confessing," Lawson cautioned. "Not yet. She's scared. She's agreed to a formal deposition with her lawyer present. Dominic's team is fighting it, of course, but the judge has approved it. This could be it, Scarlett. This could be the break we need." Hanging up the phone, Scarlett walked over to the large window of her new apartment. The city lights glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of unknown possibilities. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt a flicker of something new, something fierce and unfamiliar. She thought of the mythical phoenix, the creature that rises from the ashes of its own destruction, reborn and more powerful than before. Her old life had been burned to the ground. The fire had been excruciating, the loss unimaginable. But as she stood there, looking out at her new, uncertain future, she realized that the fire hadn't just destroyed her. It had also set her free. The ashes were still settling, but deep within them, something was beginning to stir. A woman she had forgotten existed was preparing to rise. The law office where the deposition was held was a sterile, soulless place, all glass walls and muted grey tones. It felt like a modern-day arena, a place where battles were fought not with swords, but with carefully chosen words and veiled threats. Scarlett sat beside her lawyer, Olivia Mercer, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Across the long, polished conference table sat Dominic and his lawyer, Marcus Thorne. Dominic looked confident, almost bored, as if this were just another tedious business meeting. He refused to look at Scarlett. Then Renee Ashford walked in, flanked by her own lawyer. She was pale and drawn, the sharp, confident edges of her personality seemingly worn away. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She avoided looking at either Dominic or Scarlett, her gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. She was a woman caught in an impossible position, and the strain was etched on every feature of her face. The deposition began, a slow, methodical process of questions and answers, all recorded by a court stenographer. Olivia questioned Renee first, her voice calm and precise. She started with the basics: Renee's role at the company, the length of her employment, the nature of her duties. Renee's answers were clipped, rehearsed. Then Olivia began to circle closer to the truth. Ms. Ashford, would you describe your relationship with Mr. Steele as purely professional? Renee's lawyer immediately objected. Relevance? It speaks to the witness's potential bias, Olivia countered smoothly. The judge overseeing the deposition, a stern-faced woman on a video screen, overruled the objection. Renee hesitated, her gaze flickering towards Dominic for a fraction of a second. Scarlett saw the look that passed between them. A silent command from him, a flash of fear from her. He is my boss and my mentor, Renee said, her voice tight. I have a great deal of respect for him. Olivia didn't push. Not yet. She moved on to the night of the fall. Renee recounted the official story, the one she had given to the police, the one they had all rehearsed, the dropped-off papers, the scream, the tragic tumble. So you're saying you saw Mrs. Steele trip? Olivia asked. Yes, her heel seemed to catch on the runner. And where was Mr. Steele at this moment? He was downstairs in the foyer. He cried out and ran to her after she fell. It was the same lie she had told Detective Lawson, the same crack in the story. Olivia seized on it. She had the transcript from Dominic's initial police interview. That's interesting, Olivia said, her voice deceptively casual. Because in his initial statement to the police, Mr. Steele claimed he was on the stairs behind his wife when she fell. He said he tried to catch her. Your accounts don't match, Miss Ashford. Renee's composure faltered. She licked her lips, her eyes darting nervously around the room. It was a chaotic scene. I may have misremembered the exact sequence of events. Marcus Thorne, Dominic's lawyer, leaned forward. The witness has already stated the events were traumatic and fast-moving. Minor discrepancies in recollection are to be expected, but the damage was done. The first, undeniable lie was now on the record. Olivia continued, her questions relentless, chipping away at Renee's story, highlighting inconsistencies, questioning her motives. With every answer, Renee seemed to shrink, the weight of her deception pressing down on her. Then it was Marcus Thorne's turn to question Renee. His goal was simple, to reinforce the official story and discredit Scarlett. His questions to Renee were gentle, leading, designed to portray her as a loyal employee caught in a tragic situation. Finally, he turned his attention to Scarlett, though his questions were still directed at Renee. Ms. Ashford, in your time working for Mr. Steele, have you ever witnessed Mrs. Steele behaving in an emotionally volatile or unstable manner? Objection, Olivia snapped. Counsel is attempting to slander my client. Overruled, the judge said. The witness will answer the question. Renee hesitated again, this time for a longer moment. Scarlett could see the internal struggle on her face. This was her chance to align herself fully with Dominic, to bury Scarlett under a mountain of lies. She looked at Dominic, who gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Scarlett, Mrs. Steele was always very gracious," Renee said, her voice barely a whisper. But she seemed unhappy, prone to moments of sadness. It was a carefully worded, damaging statement. It painted Scarlett as a fragile, melancholic figure, lending credence to Dominic's claim that her accusations were born of delusion. Scarlett felt a surge of cold fury. She had sat here in silence, listening to these people twist the truth, dissect her character, and erase her pain. She would not be silent anymore. She leaned over to Olivia and whispered, "Ask her about the baby shoes." Olivia looked at her, a question in her eyes. Scarlett just nodded. Olivia rose. "Just one more line of questioning for Ms. Ashford. On the night of the incident, did you see a small, gift-wrapped box on Mrs. Steele's vanity table?" The question seemed to come from nowhere. Renee looked confused. I don't recall. Let me refresh your memory," Olivia said, placing a small silver-wrapped box on the table. It was the box, the one Scarlett had asked Detective Lawson to retrieve from the house. This box. Inside are a pair of silver baby shoes. Mrs. Steele had planned to give them to her husband that night to announce her pregnancy. "Are you saying you never saw this box, Miss Ashford?" Renee stared at the box as if it were a snake. Scarlett watched her, and she also watched Dominic. His mask of calm indifference had slipped. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white where he gripped his pen. He knew what was coming. "And Miss Ashford," Olivia's voice was like ice, "were you aware that Dominic Steele had a vasectomy 2 years ago, a fact he failed to disclose to his wife?" The room went utterly still. Scarlett felt the collective shock like a physical blow. She looked at Dominic, whose face had drained of all color. He stared at Renee, his expression a mixture of fury and panic. Renee's carefully constructed facade shattered. A choked sob escaped her lips. The affair was one thing, but this was a level of deception, of cold, calculated cruelty that was staggering. Dominic hadn't just been unhappy about the pregnancy. He had known, with absolute certainty, that the baby could not be his. "Renee," Dominic said, his voice a low warning. But it was too late. The truth, once unleashed, has a momentum all its own. Renee looked at Scarlett, her eyes swimming with tears. For the first time, she saw not a rival, but another woman betrayed by the same man. She saw the pain, the loss, the quiet strength. And in that moment, her own self-preservation was overwhelmed by a sudden, desperate need for redemption. "He knew," Renee whispered, her voice trembling. When Scarlett told him she was pregnant, he accused her. He said she had cheated on him. He called her names. He was enraged. "Objection!" Thorne roared, jumping to his feet. "And what happened then, Miss Ashford?" Olivia pressed, her voice ringing with authority. Renee's gaze was fixed on Scarlett, her voice gaining strength with every word of truth. She ran. He went after her. I heard him yell, "You will not ruin me." And then I saw him. He was right behind her on the stairs. He put his hands on her back, and he pushed her. He pushed her with all his strength. A collective gasp filled the room. Dominic lunged forward, his face a mask of pure hatred. "You lying bitch!" he screamed. Thorne and a security guard restrained him as he struggled, his expensive suit rumpled, his dignity gone, his true, monstrous self finally revealed for all to see. Scarlett just sat there, tears streaming down her face. They were not tears of sadness, but of vindication. The truth was out. It was ugly, it was brutal, but it was real, and it was, finally, free. In the sterile, soulless arena, amidst the wreckage of 3 lives, the battle had been won. The deposition was the breaking point. Renee's confession, a dramatic and undeniable account of the truth, sent shockwaves through the legal proceedings, and soon after, the public. With a credible witness now corroborating Scarlett's story, the district attorney's office moved swiftly. Dominic Steele, the untouchable titan of tech, was arrested and charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, and feticide. The trial was a media circus. Reporters and television crews camped outside the courthouse, their cameras hungry for every scrap of the salacious story. The billionaire, the wife, the mistress, the secret vasectomy. Inside the courtroom, the drama was more subdued, but infinitely more intense. Scarlett had to testify. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Sitting in the witness box, she faced Dominic, who stared at her with cold, dead eyes, his expression devoid of any remorse. With Olivia by her side, Scarlett told her story, her voice quiet but unwavering. She spoke of their life together, of the gilded cage, of her excitement about the baby, and of the horrifying moment on the stairs. She did not cry. Her testimony was delivered with a calm, chilling precision that left the courtroom in stunned silence. Dominic's defense team, led by Marcus Thorne, tried to tear her apart on cross-examination. They brought up her moments of sadness, her emotional nature, and tried to paint her as a scorned woman seeking revenge. But Scarlett held her ground. Her drawings, the raw, visceral charcoal sketches of her trauma, were entered into evidence. They were more powerful than any photograph, a direct window into her experience that the jury could not ignore. The most damning testimony, however, came from Renee. On the stand, she was a shadow of her former self. The sharp suits and confident ambition were gone, replaced by a quiet, somber humility. She recounted the affair, Dominic's manipulations, and the events of that night in painstaking detail. She wept as she described the shove, her voice breaking as she admitted her own cowardice in lying to the police. "Why did you lie?" the prosecutor asked. "I was afraid," Renee said, looking at the jury, her eyes pleading for understanding. "And I was a fool. I believed his promises. I thought I was protecting my future, but I was just helping a monster bury his crimes." Dominic's fate was sealed. The jury took less than a day to find him guilty on all counts. The judge, citing the extreme cruelty and lack of remorse shown by the defendant, sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 25 years. As he was led away in handcuffs, his face was a blank mask of disbelief. The man who had controlled everything had finally lost control of his own destiny. The end of the trial did not bring Scarlett the triumphant joy she might have expected. It brought a quiet, profound sense of peace. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for the child she never got to hold. In the months that followed, Scarlett began to build a new life, piece by piece. She finalized her divorce from Dominic, taking control of the assets she was rightfully owed. But she didn't stay in the world of galas and mansions. She sold the Atherton estate, the monument to a life that was never truly hers. The proceeds went into a new foundation she established, one dedicated to supporting women and children who were victims of domestic abuse, the Phoenix Foundation. She went back to school, finishing her master's degree in art history. She bought a modest but beautiful loft in the city, a space filled with light, books, and the smell of oil paint and canvas. She started painting again, not just her trauma, but her hope. Her canvases were filled with bold colors, with images of strength and resilience, of light breaking through darkness. One afternoon, she received a letter. It was from Renee. She had been given a reduced sentence for her cooperation and was serving 2 years in a low-security facility. The letter was a long, heartfelt apology. She took full responsibility for her actions, for the affair, for the lies. She did not ask for forgiveness. She only wanted Scarlett to know the depth of her regret. "I know that sorry is a meaningless word after what I've done," Renee wrote. "But I want you to know that testifying was the only decent thing I have ever done in my life. You showed me what real strength is. I hope one day I can find a fraction of the courage you have." Scarlett folded the letter. She wasn't sure if she could ever forgive Renee, but she understood her. They were two different women, from two different worlds, who had been drawn into the destructive orbit of the same man. In a strange, tragic way, their stories would forever be intertwined. She hoped that Renee, too, would find a way to rise from her own ashes. A year after the trial, Scarlett held the first exhibition of her work. The gallery was packed. Her paintings, a collection she titled The Gilded Cage, were a raw, powerful exploration of her journey. Detective Lawson was there, looking proud, and Olivia, who had become a close friend. As she stood amongst her art, talking to people who were moved by her story and her talent, she felt a sense of wholeness she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer Scarlett Steele, the billionaire's wife. She was Scarlett Munro, the artist, the survivor, the phoenix. Her life was not a fairy tale. The scars of her past would always be a part of her, a reminder of the darkness she had endured. But they were no longer open wounds. They were proof of her resilience. She had walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but transformed. She was free, and her future, like the blank canvas waiting for her in her sunlit studio, was full of infinite possibility. Thank you for watching this story of heartbreak and resilience. The journey of Scarlett Munro reminds us that the most beautiful lives can hide the darkest secrets, and true strength is often forged in the most devastating fires. It's a story about the fight for truth in a world of lies, and the incredible power of the human spirit to rise from the ashes. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates powerful, real-life drama. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story. We're dedicated to bringing you the most compelling, emotional, and unforgettable narratives. What part of Scarlett's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for being part of our community.